Hello and welcome back to Designing and Building Custom Apps Using Dynamics 365 for Customer Engagement Volume 1. In this section we're going to look at the design of our Spaceflight 365 system so that we can then move into an effective implementation phase. We're going to firstly start looking at some of the best practices that I use to model the behavior of our app before we actually start coding it. And then we're going to look at the unified interface and how that changes the way that we approach our user interface compared to the previous web application interface. And then we're going to go back to school a little bit and look at some of the more basic aspects, but often overlooked aspects of designing apps. Let's start with a topic called user story mapping. Now, there is an awful lot of information out there, entire books, entire courses that you can learn about agile development. One of the core parts of agile requirements modeling is something called user story. Now, a user story can take on many different forms. It can be very high level and it can be very low level, right down to the detail of how we might code something. Now, this idea has been around for an awfully long time. Back in the day, it used to be called a use case. And the idea is that you're trying to describe something in a way that can lead on to development. Now, in an agile world, we try and describe everything purely from the point of view of a user. And we want to describe it in a way which is pointing out the objectives and the needs of the user rather than dictating how it's going to be implemented. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how to write user stories because you can find that information elsewhere. But one of the really useful ways I find of starting to develop an app is taking a broad brush approach at our user stories and ordering them into particular features. So in this case, we've ordered them into flight management, record bookings, and then check-in. And so each of these areas we're going to then have specific user stories in to fulfill particular needs. Now, I try not to get bogged down at this stage with which level they are, if they're high level or if they're all of the same similar size, or even if they are correctly formed user stories. The idea is to create a broad brush view of our application. So you notice that we've got information about spaceports and routes and flights, so we need to be able to manage that in order to set up the data that's going to be used. And then we've also got the process that a user is going to take when they will create a booking, and they'll manage the passengers and confirm the payments and booking cancellations, and then finally the check-in to do with security and seat selection, etc. So what we're trying to do here is to create a good overview of the application surface so that we can then delve into each of these different specific areas and then start to elaborate on that and looking at particular aspects of the system like storyboarding the user interface or investigating the how, the who, the what, the when, etc. But also notice on this storyboard we've got a level here which above that is the minimum viable product, and the MVP is something that is used very strategically in an agile project to stop us trying to gold plate, as it's often called, our solution. We're trying to create the absolute minimum functionality in order to achieve the key objectives of our users so that we can learn from that process and solicit feedback from those users, which will then influence our subsequent development. So in this case, release 2. And so you can notice here that I've put a line to say that things like cancellations and status monitoring of flights is all in release 2. So it's not necessary that we'll release the minimal viable product, but the MVP is something that will draw a line under and say, let's get people using this system, not necessarily in a production environment, but at least it's something that will hang together and deliver business value as soon as possible.